The game was tight throughout the first half with the lead changing on every possession. Lubbock High would score, Ferguson High would get the ball, and Ferguson quarterback Danny Keel would bring his team into the end zone to tie the game. Throughout the first half, the score would fluctuate back and forth, and every time Ferguson had the ball, the Jag staff would pause and watch Danny lead Ferguson into the end zone. Humphrey's Korean camp was 15 hours away from Dallas, Texas, so the game everyone was watching Saturday afternoon was being played Friday night in Texas during the Texas 6A State Championship. The game was shown on a 90-inch monitor mounted on the wall and streamed from Lieutenant Grant Keel's cell phone to an Apple TV connected to the JAG office's audio and video system. Ferguson began to pull ahead in the second half, and by the time the 2-minute warning was called in the fourth quarter, its lead was 48-38. The game wasn't over yet and anything could have happened, but things were looking up for Danny's team, and that's exactly how the game ended. Ferguson was ahead by 10 points. Danny racked up 275 yards and 4 touchdowns with 1 interception. On Saturday, the JAG staff was preparing for the upcoming Inspector General's visit, and although the Inspector General's inspection was coming up, Lieutenant Keel wasn't too worried about it. Nevertheless, there was always the lingering doubt that someone had failed to put a signature or timestamp on some document. The JAG office usually declared Saturdays complete to make sure they were as close to perfect as possible. This check was even more important than the others because this was Lieutenant Keel's last visit to the IG due to his impending retirement from active duty. Grant was originally scheduled to retire in 3 months, but it was decided that the IG check would be a great springboard for a change in command. So shortly after the check, he would fly back to the U.S. to begin his separation from active duty. Only his brother knew about the change in plans, and Grant was pleased to see the look on his wife and son's faces when he arrived home. Grant's staff cheered his son's performance and clapped him on the back as students, parents, and fans ran onto the field after the final whistle. There was pandemonium on the field as everyone began hugging each other, jumping and dancing around the field. When the JAG staff saw a slender brunette beauty rushing to hug Danny, there was almost deafening shouting and whistling in the office. Everyone had seen the pictures of Lieutenant Keel's wife on his desk and envied his beautiful wife. Kat's delight and joy was written all over her face as she hugged her son after his stellar performance. The crowd that spilled out onto the field celebrated by screaming, laughing, and crying, usually all at the same time. What she did next, however, caused the shouting and whistling to stop and the entire office to fall into silence. Kat threw herself into the arms of Randy Kane, the head coach of Team Ferguson, and kissed him. Lieutenant Keel stared at the screen in bewilderment, and the JAG office staff averted their eyes in embarrassment. Grant stopped the stream, closed Safari, and sat down at his desk, stunned by what he had just seen. What all of his employees had seen. The blatant disrespect shown to him by his wife and his son's football coach was unconscionable. "Colonel, are you okay?" Captain Lynn Dunaway asked. Grant looked at her and shook his head. It's not just that she's cheating. It's about her being so blunt about it. He was really lost in conjecture. Captain Dunaway grabbed Grant's arm and pulled him out of his chair. "You need some air," she said, directing him out the back door and into the small parking lot in front of the JAG office. Grant knew he must present a pitiful sight, standing in the cool sun of a Korean morning with tears streaming down his face. What? Damn it! Damn it!" Captain Dunaway said. "Jesus, Colonel, what she did, it's just awful." As Grant stood there trying to comprehend what he had just witnessed, an incoming message arrived on his phone. "Danny, sorry you weren't there. Great game. We won 48-38. I scored 4,275 points and 4 TDS. Grant looked at his phone, contemplating how to answer it. Captain Dunaway realized what he was thinking and grabbed his wrist before he could respond to his son's message. "Send a return message as usual. Don't say anything that might come back to haunt you." Grant nodded his head in agreement and replied, "Dad, that's great. I wish I had been there too. Great job. How long do you think this has been going on?" Captain Dunaway asked. "What difference does it make if it's a day, a month, or a year? I've been in Korea for 9 months now, so it could have been going on the whole time I've been here. We bought a house a year ago, so I don't think it's been going on longer than that since I've been home every weekend. But now I'm wondering how many there have been. Hell, is Danny even my son? They talked for another 30 minutes until Grant calmed down enough to go back to the office and address his staff. It was the most humiliating and embarrassing act of his life, and they were embarrassed for him. Shortly after his address to his staff, Grant thanked them for coming and retired. If they still couldn't pass an IG check, they never could again. The following week was typical of this type of audit. Like a private sector audit, an IG audit is as invasive a procedure as a colonoscopy. Everything you did and every decision you made is questioned and must be answered politely and clearly. As a result, they passed the IG check and it was time to turn over command to Lieutenant Kiana Cardwell, who replaced Lieutenant Keel. Grant had known Kiana for several years and knew she was a fine officer and an excellent lawyer, and the JAG staff would be in good hands. The only person other than Grant not staying in Korea with Colonel Cardwell was Captain Lynn Dunaway. She would go with him to Fort Cavazos, Texas, where he would serve his enlistment and join the Army Reserve, and she would go to her new duty station in the JAG branch of the 3 Corps. Grant considered himself greatly indebted to Captain Dunaway. In the weeks after he'd learned of his wife's infidelity, she'd been a shoulder for him to cry on and a moral support while he processed paperwork, leaving the only full-time job he'd ever known. Randy Kane walked to his truck in a foul mood. "We don't have to stop. You can divorce him and marry me. I'd marry you in a heartbeat if you agreed." Kat tensed next to Randy. "I already told you that's not going to happen. I love my husband. When he gets out of the Army, I'll spend the rest of my life paying him back for our little affair. When Grant comes home, you and I will see each other in the hallway at school or in the cafeteria, smiling and saying hello. I'll still be teaching science and you'll still be coaching, and we can still be friends. But I love my husband, and nothing can destroy my marriage." Randy broke into a bitter laugh. "If you love him so much, why am I in your bed?" Kat shook her head. "He's different, but not necessarily better." Randy grumbled unhappily. Kat had met her husband Grant at the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney, Australia. Kat played on the U.S. women's volleyball team, and Grant played on the U.S. fencing team. Kat was in her final year of college, and Grant was a first lieutenant in the Army and participated in the world-class athlete program, which gave service members the opportunity to play sports while serving. Kat and Grant met at the Olympic Village, and there was an immediate attraction between them. The fact that Kat was originally from Dallas, Texas, and Grant grew up an hour away in Ferguson, Texas, strengthened their relationship. The U.S. women's volleyball team failed to medal at the Olympics, but Grant was a 2-time medalist, a silver medal in individual saber and a bronze medal in team saber. Kat explained to Randy that her husband preferred the more aggressive style of fencing, the saber, because it involves striking and chopping rather than just touching like the rapier and épée. Randy only stared at her blankly. When Kat first told Randy that her husband was a world-class fencer, Randy had envisioned some guy who was good at digging holes and didn't understand why she was bragging about him. After learning what fencing was, oh how Zorro, and that it was a real sport, Randy felt annoyed and jealous that Grant was not only married to a beauty like Kat, but was also an Olympic medalist. While the two were having fun at the Olympic Village, Randy was in middle school trying to gain mass so he could play high school football. Playing in high school and then in college for the Arkansas team, the 6'2", 265-pound quarterback was not drafted by any team. As a player, he was signed to the Detroit Lions practice squad, but was waived after 1 year. He was then placed on Buffalo's practice squad, but was released after 3 weeks. Realizing that his NFL career was going nowhere, he signed with the Ottawa Renegades in the Canadian Football League, but was released mid-season. Randy then moved into coaching and quickly moved up the ranks of high school coaches, culminating in Ferguson's victory over Lubbock in the Texas 6A championship. After that win, several colleges offered Randy to join their coaching staffs, and he felt he was in an advantageous position, although most of the offers depended on him taking Danny Keel with him. If only he could get Kat to divorce Soldier and marry him, life would be perfect. Randy decided he had 3 months to go full throttle to convince Kat to leave her husband and marry him. After that, her husband will retire and come home. Kat hints that they may eventually resume their affair, but that's where it ends. In the fall, Danny will start college and will no longer fool around like he used to. Getting caught up with the coach and his mom, Wouldn't that be a disaster? Kat and Randy thought Danny was gone for the day, and Randy went to Kat's kitchen to get water for both of them. Danny lunged at the coach with his fist raised, but before Danny could do anything, Randy delivered a kick with his foot that sent Danny collapsing to the kitchen floor and nearly knocked him unconscious. Hearing the noise, Kat threw on a robe and rushed into the kitchen in time to see Danny struggling to get to his feet. She stepped between her lover and her son and asked them to stop and calm down. Kat assured her son that her relationship with Randy was just an affair and would not affect her marriage in any way. She begged Danny not to say a word to his father because it would destroy him. Danny would be responsible for his parents' divorce and his father's devastation, and his silence was necessary to save the marriage and his father's mental health. Danny angrily agreed to remain silent, and over the past few months seemed to have gradually come to terms with the affair, and could sometimes even joke with his mother and Randy about their relationship. Although in the past couple of weeks, Randy had noticed a chill in the air whenever he was around Danny. Randy had to admit that it was partly his own fault that things had turned out this way. Things had almost gotten out of hand a couple weeks ago when Danny walked into his bedroom and saw Randy looking at his trophies. "I didn't know you did karate," Randy said. Danny just looked at Randy and asked, "What are you doing in my room?" Randy pointed to a framed certificate. "I have a black belt too. I've been doing karate since I was 8 years old." Randy hoped he would be able to develop a different relationship with Danny than that of coach and player. If Danny saw him as a mentor or stepfather, maybe he would listen to Randy's point about changing colleges. Danny politely asked Randy to leave his room. As Randy continued to chat with Danny about karate and martial arts, Danny interrupted Randy by saying with barely contained rage, "Get out of my room, you goddamn asshole." Randy was about to respond to Danny, but backed off at the last moment. He didn't care about Danny's feelings, but Kat, have you thought about changing Danny's mind about college? Kat rolled her eyes at Randy, bringing up the subject again. He's not going to change his mind. He's been planning it his whole life, and he's not going to change his mind this late. His father went there, and he's going to go. Nobody but a bunch of soldiers and sailors gives a damn about how the Army plays with the Navy. I don't understand why he wants to go to West Point when he can go to any D1 school in the country. It doesn't make sense to me. He'll play at a top school, then the NFL will pick him up and he'll move on. Pulling away from Kat's house, Randy rounded the front of his truck and noticed that the driver's front tire was flat. Damn, he thought. This couldn't have happened on a worse day. Randy was running a little late as it was, and now the thought of changing the tire was pissing him off as well. Today was supposed to be the ceremonial rally and hanging of the state championship banner. The entire football team and coaching staff would be honored and praised, and Randy was to give a short speech and then introduce each player by telling some fun fact about them. Reporters would be in attendance, and Randy saw the event as another way to raise his coaching profile. As Randy squatted down next to the flat tire, he felt rather than saw someone behind him, and then felt something hit him in the back. Randy was able to turn around and look at his attacker, who was wearing a black hoodie, dark sunglasses, and a black mask that effectively hid his identity. He saw the assailant bring an aluminum baseball bat backwards, and then time seemed to slow down as Randy saw the bat swing forward. Randy was able to read the manufacturer's name Easton, written in large letters on the barrel of the bat, and the phrase B5 Pro Big Barrel underneath as he watched the bat head toward his face in slow motion. The unidentified man then grabbed a bicycle that was parked in a landscaped area of the cul-de-sac across from Keel's home, jumped on it, and quickly rode away from the scene. As she hurried out of the garage to catch the picket, Kat was surprised to see Randy's pickup truck still parked on the street in front of her house. Her house was at the end of a cul-de-sac and the traffic wasn't heavy here, so she never worried about Randy parking his pickup in front of her house. Her 3-car garage fit her Lexus, Danny's Camaro, and Grant's Lincoln SUV, so the street was the only room for his Dodge Ram with its huge tires and raised suspension. Backing up, she glanced over at his truck and was surprised to see Randy lying in the street. Thinking he had fallen or was having a heart attack, Kat put the car in park mode and ran to Randy's aid. As she ran up to him, she saw the unnatural position of his arms and legs, and when she looked at his face with his jaw hanging down, she cried out and the world went dark for a moment. Coming to her senses, Kat grabbed her phone and called emergency services. Then she had the good sense to call the school and explain that neither she nor Coach Kane would be in that day. Detectives Mann and Lucas sat side by side on the couch in Kat Keel's living room, declining the coffee she offered. "I hope this won't take too long, Mrs. Keel," Detective Mann said. "For what purpose did Coach Kane visit you early this morning?" Kat blushed at such a question. "He stayed the night," she answered quietly. The detectives looked at each other, and then Mann asked the obvious follow-up question. "Did you have a sexual relationship with Coach Kane?" Kat nodded her head, tears streaming from her eyes. "How long were you in contact with Coach Kane?" "About 9 months," Kat answered almost in a whisper. "Does your husband currently reside here?" Detective Lucas, the female half of the duo, asked. "My husband is serving at Camp Humphrey in Korea," Kat sobbed. "He's due to retire in 3 months and come home." At this, Kat had to interrupt her questioning to take a couple deep breaths. "Does he know about your relationship with Coach Kane?" "Oh no. He can never find out about my affair. It would kill him. This whole situation needs to be kept from him," Kat pleaded. "Mrs. Keel, we will have to question your husband. He looks very bad physically after leaving the house he owns with you. There is absolutely no way to keep this situation from him," Detective Lucas said. There was a long pause as Kat began sobbing loudly and left to gather her thoughts. When she returned with a box of tissues in hand, the detectives resumed their questioning. "Mrs. Keel, are you sure your husband is in Korea? Could he have returned to the United States?" "No, that's impossible. If Grant were in the United States, he would be here. My husband loves me too much to stay away from our home." Kat pulled out her iPhone and tapped the screen. "See? He's still in Korea." Apple's Find My Phone program clearly showed that her husband's phone was in Korea. Mann and Lucas looked at each other thinking the same thing. All it proved was that his phone was in Korea. "Mrs. Keel, who else lives in the house with you?" "My son Danny," Kat replied. "Could he have attacked Coach Kane?" Detective Mann asked. "No, that's impossible. I heard his car pull away about 30 minutes before the attack on Randy, and I know he was at a school rally at the time. My son has a good relationship with Randy. He was Danny's football coach." Detective Mann was aware of the fact that Randy Kane was Danny's football coach. Ferguson winning the state title was a huge event for the city, and Danny's performance was already legendary. Mann was at the game and saw Kat kissing Randy on the sidelines. Everyone assumed she was the coach's wife or girlfriend. No one knew she was another man's wife. "Did your son know about your relationship with Coach Kane?" Lucas asked. "Yes, he wasn't thrilled about it at first, but then he got over it. I explained to him that it wouldn't affect my marriage to his father in any way, and he agreed." At those words, Mann and Lucas looked at each other. How delusional was this woman? Those looks said. "Mrs. Keel, I noticed you have a doorbell camera. Can we see the videotape?" Kat looked at the detectives in surprise. "I completely forgot about that. I have an app on my iPad." Kat took the device from the nightstand and tapped the screen a few times before handing it to Detective Mann. "Just press play." The detectives watched as Randy Kane left Keel's house and walked over to his truck, where he apparently noticed a flat tire. Kane's truck blocked their view of what was happening, but as far as they could tell, as he squatted down to inspect the tire, a tall, thin figure rushed toward Kane from across the street. The figure was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, sunglasses, and a COVID mask. The assailant lowered the bat several times before jumping on his bicycle and riding away, clutching the bat under his arm. There was nothing of interest in the video. It was impossible to determine whether the assailant was male or female, much less identify him. The video has been enhanced, but it was high-definition footage, so there was probably nothing interesting there. Mann asked for and received permission from Kat to send the video to his police email account. "Mrs. Keel," Detective Mann began, putting heavy emphasis on the word Mrs., "can you name anyone who would be motivated to attack Coach Kane in such a violent manner?" "No," Kat sobbed. "I can't think of anyone who would do something so horrible. I don't understand why anyone would attack Randy. He didn't deserve it." Grant Keel was sitting at the dining room table in his brother's house filling out the paperwork his divorce attorney had requested when the doorbell rang. Betty Lou, his sister-in-law, opened the door and shouted to Grant that he had guests. As he approached the door, he saw two people, a man and a woman with badges, identifying them as detectives from the Ferguson Police Department. "May I come in?" the man asked. Grant looked at Betty Lou, who shrugged. So he invited the police officers in and directed them to the living room. The detectives looked over the tall, slender woman and were amazed. Betty Lou Keel was under 6 feet and weighed about 150 pounds. Her raven hair was styled in a stylish, asymmetrical bob that was longer on the right side than the left. There was a streak of gray hair on the right side in the front that accentuated the piercing blue of her eyes. Her nose was slightly off-center, as if it had been broken at least once, and a barely noticeable 2-inch scar ran down from the corner of her left eye. She was a visually attractive woman. Grant Keel was also visually striking. Grant was over 6 feet tall and weighed 180 pounds, but detectives discovered during their investigation that he was not a runner, but a fencer, a hobby that had taken him to the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, and he was still active in the sport. Keel's dark hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and his blue eyes were kind, but sad. Detective Lucas felt herself reacting to Grant Keel. "What should I call you, Mr. Keel, or Lieutenant Colonel Keel?" The man who introduced himself as Detective Mann asked. "Mr. is fine, or you can call me Grant, or you can call me Colonel. I was recently promoted to full colonel, but I don't usually stick to formalities." "Promoted? From what we understand, you're retiring," Detective Mann said. "From active duty. I'm in the reserves. Monthly meetings and 2 weeks in the summer. Hopefully I'll last long enough to get a star," Grant said. Detective Lucas nodded. Very nice, she thought. Brenda Lucas had served in the Army as an MP, earning the rank of E4. The man in front of her was an Olympic medalist, a lawyer, a full colonel, and had a goal of reaching the rank of brigadier general. Cat Keel was a bloody idiot, she thought. "On Mr. Keel, we'll stop for now. I'm sure you know why we're here." "I have a good idea," Grant replied. "Someone beat the shit out of the man who slept with my wife, and you think it was me." "It was you?" the female half-asked, introducing herself as Detective Lucas. "No matter how I answer, I'll still be considered a person of interest, so I'll just keep my mouth shut on that one," Grant replied. "Can you tell us where you were 3 mornings ago at 7:30 a.m.? "7:30? I was practicing with my brother. He combined several bedrooms into one big room and set it up as a gym. So every morning we work out together from about 7:30 to 8:30 or so. After that, he takes a shower, goes to his home office, and logs in since he works remotely. I go to the guest room, take a shower, and then get to the cases I'm currently working on." "Any witnesses besides your brother?" Detective Mann asked. "No, just him. Betty Lou, my sister-in-law, leaves the house just before work to go to her job, so it's just the two of us." "When was the last time you were in your house? The one where your wife and son live and where the attack on Randy Kane happened?" "About a week ago," Grant replied. "I stopped by when no one was home to pick up some clothes and some papers from the archives. I didn't disturb anything my wife or Coach Kane had." "Did you know they were having an affair?" Detective Lucas asked. "Knew. You seemed pretty calm and detached about it." "I've come to terms with her behavior and the end of my marriage. It is what it is. About 2 hours ago, she thought you were still in the military and serving in Korea. When we informed her that you left Korea a month ago and were living with your brother, she didn't believe us. She saw that you were still serving at Camp Humphrey. She called your office and was told that you checked out of Korea a few weeks ago. Your wife had a breakdown when she found out. Hysterical, screaming, the whole thing. Had to call an ambulance and the medics had to sedate her." Grant shrugged. "I'd say she's Coach Kane's problem, and he can take care of her. But from what I've read about his condition, he's in no condition to do so. As for my whereabouts, I forgot my cell phone and left it on charge in my office. The officer who replaced me sent it to me." A skeptical look appeared on the detectives' faces as Detective Mann said, "That was very convenient, wasn't it?" Grant shrugged again and ignored the question. Leland, Grant's brother, came out of his home office for a moment and stopped when he saw Grant talking to the detectives. "They think you did it?" Leland asked. Grant nodded his head. "They haven't charged me yet, but they're already starting to slowly come out on me. They're going to ask me how I found out about my wife cheating on me and why I didn't tell her I was back in Ferguson. Then they're probably going to ask about my alibi, and then they're going to try to arrest me for first-degree assault before they realize they have no evidence and no case. Then they'll get mad at me and tell me not to leave town before they start annoying someone else." "Sounds about right," Leland agreed. The two detectives looked incredulously at Grant and Leland, who were quietly discussing what action they should take and swiveling their heads back and forth like they were at a tennis match while Betty Lou Keel was having fun. "How do you know what we're thinking?" Detective Mann asked, looking at them incredulously. "I was an Army JAG officer. I've supervised more investigations than you can imagine. My brother was an Army CID agent before retiring and starting his own security company. We know what you're thinking before you even think it." An annoyed expression appeared on Detective Mann's face at the thought of his game plan being so transparent. "If you know all the questions, then by all means answer them." Grant cast a hard look at Mann. "I found out about my wife's infidelity because I saw her making out with Kane after the state championship game. I'm sure you've seen the videotape." Mann nodded. He had seen the videotape of the kiss. Everyone assumed it was Randy Kane's girlfriend, but after the attack, it became clear what kind of woman it was. "I didn't tell her I went back to Ferguson because I don't want to see her. I work with a divorce attorney, and I don't want to hear her try to justify her actions or blame me." "And your son?" Mann asked. "You haven't contacted him either." "Did you see him interacting with Kane and my wife?" "I did. It didn't seem to bother him." Grant nodded his head. "I guess we don't have much to talk about, do we?" "So," Detective Lucas said, "do you have an alibi?" "Should we show them the tapes?" Leland Keel asked. Grant nodded. "This seems like a good time." "What tapes? What do you have on the tapes?" Leland excused himself for a minute and returned with an iPad. He pointed the TV remote at the 60-inch flat screen built into the wall. When the TV turned on, he transferred the image from the iPad to the TV screen and pressed the play button. "I have cameras all over the house, including the hallway, front door, and backyard. This is video from this morning." The TV screen displayed footage from 6 different cameras. The doorbell camera faced the street, another camera was facing the backyard, and the third camera was in the garage. The other 3 cameras showed the kitchen, living room, and the hallway where the bedrooms were located. This footage was taken at 7:22 a.m. They saw Betty Lou come out of the bedroom wearing a white blouse, black pencil skirt, and black stiletto shoes. She was dressed for her job as the CFO of a healthcare company. The camera recorded her walking down the hallway and lost her when she reached the end of the hallway. The camera in the living room then recorded her walking across the room, after which the camera in the kitchen lost her and recorded her. This camera lost her as she walked out of the house into the garage. The dark garage suddenly brightened as the garage door went up and the cameras recorded her getting into her Lexus SUV. Betty Lou drove out of the garage and the camera followed her SUV into the street. At the same time, the doorbell camera captured a side view of her vehicle pulling into the street before the garage door came down. Pressing pause, Leland froze the image. Based on the timestamp, the picture was taken at 7:25 a.m. Leland then tapped the screen a few times, moving the image to 7:28. "That's me and Grant." They watched the video of Grant and Leland approaching the room down the hallway from different directions. Grant was wearing a red hoodie and red sweatpants, and Leland was wearing the same thing, a red hoodie and red sweatpants. "I'm coming from my bedroom and Grant is coming from the guest room," Leland explained. Grant entered the room first, followed by Leland. "We can sit here and stare at the empty room for an hour, or I can fast forward an hour, it's up to you," Leland said, looking at the two detectives. "Fast forward," Detective Mann said. Leland tapped the screen a few times and froze as Grant and Leland left the room at 8:26. They had been studying for 58 minutes. "This is yesterday's video," Leland said. The video was almost identical to today's, except the time had been moved up a couple minutes, and instead of a pencil skirt, Betty Lou was wearing a stylish, feminine black pantsuit with heels. Grant and Leland again came from opposite ends of the gym and met at the door to the home gym wearing identical sweatshirts, this time gray. They were in the gym again for a full hour. Leland tapped the iPad screen a few times, bringing up another screen. This is the same footage, but from this morning when the asshole was attacked. They saw Betty Lou coming out of her bedroom again, but instead of wearing clothes for work, she was wearing workout clothes consisting of a thin black hoodie, black sweatpants, and white tennis shoes. "I took the day off to work out because I have a triathlon in a couple weeks. Today was bike day, and I rode the bike path around Ferguson Park 4 times," Betty Lou explained. They watched Betty Lou reverse her SUV out of the garage and noticed that this time the bikes were in a rack attached to the back of the SUV. As they continued to watch the tape, they saw Leland emerge from her bedroom wearing a black hoodie and black sweatpants, and seconds later Grant, also dressed in a black hoodie and black sweatpants, emerged from the guest room. The detectives looked at each other in bewilderment. "Are you guys kidding me?" Detective Lucas asked. "Are you three serious? Do you really expect us to believe it's a complete coincidence that the three of you are wearing the same clothes as Kane's attacker on the day of the attack?" Leland and Grant shrugged simultaneously. "Let the record speak for itself," Grant replied. Leland said, "I'm not going to fast forward the tape, but I'm going to play it back at double speed so you can watch it. But before I do that, can I offer you a cup of coffee or something? Even at double speed, we'll be sitting here for half an hour stretching our fingers." After getting everyone a cup of coffee, Leland pressed the play button again and all five of them watched the countdown. After 25 minutes, Leland stopped playing the video in double time and started showing it in real time. The brothers left the gym at 8:31 and headed to their rooms, still in their sweatshirts. "Here comes the day in question. As you can see, none of us left the room. I'll give you the records without a warrant. Can you show us the gym?" The detectives didn't seem convinced of Grant's alibi. "Sure," Leland said. The officers followed him into the hallway, looking over his shoulder at the dark orb concealing the ceiling-mounted camera that filmed the gym. They looked around the room where the gym was located and then at each other. The home gym was a large room formed by combining 3 bedrooms and eliminating closets and storage areas. Half of the room was filled with free weights, benches, a large set of dumbbells and kettlebells. There was also a rowing machine and an elliptical trainer. The other half of the room had been converted into a small dojo. There were shelves built into one of the walls that held several trophies. Also framed were pictures of Leland and Betty Lou fighting their opponents in the ring in mixed martial arts competitions. In one of the photos, Betty Lou Keel was shown with a referee's hand raised victoriously while her opponent stood in a daze, supported by a trainer. Betty Lou's left eye was swollen and puffy, and her nose appeared to be broken and slightly off to the side. "Wow," Detective Lucas said quietly and slowly, looking at Betty Lou's picture with admiration. "Your wife is a badass." "You bet she is," said Leland Keel. "And not just for that reason," he said, waving his hand toward the photos and trophies. "She's fiercely loyal to her family and friends and is the finest woman I've ever known. She's one of a kind, and I'll never get tired of telling her that." Grant nodded his head sadly. He had once thought the same thing about his wife, but thinking back, Kat had never been like Betty Lou. She'd never had such a strong devotion. "What about the windows?" Detective Lucas asked. The room had plain windows with wooden blinds that were currently in the open position. "Are you asking if I could have slipped out during practice and attacked Coach Kane?" Grant asked. "You could have, or he could have," said Detective Mann, pointing first at Grant and then at Leland. "That's true," said Leland. "But we didn't do it." "Can you prove it? Can you prove you didn't slip away?" Detective Lucas asked in an aggressive tone. "Detective," said Leland, "that's the wrong question." "Yeah? What's the right question?" Detective Lucas asked, her irritation evident. "The right question is this: can you prove that we actually escaped?" Grant replied. "I'll escort you both out," Leland added. "Colonel Cardwell, what can I do for you?" "Colonel Cardwell, I understand you are in charge of the JAG office at Camp Humphrey?" "Absolutely correct. Who's calling, please?" "Colonel, my name is Detective Brenda Lucas of the Ferguson Police Department in Ferguson, Texas. I'm calling about your predecessor, Colonel Grant Keel." "Ah, yes, how is Grant doing?" "He was fine the last time I saw him. Colonel Cardwell, Colonel Keel told us he left his cell phone in his office in Korea." "Yes, he did. It was in a charger on a dresser in what used to be his office. I didn't know where to send it, so I held on to it. A few days ago, he called me and gave me an address to send it to, which I did." "Colonel, what day did he contact you and give you the address?" "Last Monday. He also told me to answer any questions about him that any caller might have." "Sounds like Grant was anticipating trouble," Colonel Cardwell said. "Great," Lucas thought. On the day of the attack, when he no longer cared if his wife knew he was in town, he'd get his phone back. Detective Lucas thanked Cardwell and immediately called Grant Keel. I spoke to Colonel Cardwell and she confirmed what you said about the cell phone. She also said she sent it to you. Colonel Cardwell is very efficient. If she said she sent it on a certain day, you can bet your pension that she did. Colonel, I want to be the one to open that package. I want to see your cell phone before anyone else. I don't have a warrant and you have every right to refuse, but it will help prove your innocence. A long pause hung on the other end of the phone before Kip answered. I don't think I'll have a problem with that since I have nothing to hide. I'll call you when he arrives. If she send him out on Monday, he should be here in a day or so. While investigating the neighborhood of Leland Keel's home, detectives discovered that a house across the street from Leland Keel's home had a camera with a doorbell pointed at Keel's home. When questioned, the homeowner, Bobby Lee Gerson, stated that yes, his doorbell camera captures video, and yes, it is stored in the cloud. Detectives felt they had taken the first step in the case and sat down at a table with Gerson to review the video footage. Because the houses stood side by side, Leland Keel's doorbell camera was pointed at footage of his own driveway, but only filmed the side of Gerson's house. Gerson's camera, on the other hand, was angled to provide a perfect view of Keel's house. Bobby Lee Gerson was a captain in the fire department and was in the business of designing firefighting equipment. He had several patents and licensed his designs to several companies. He had an attached machine shop in the back of his house with a CNC table, milling equipment, lathe, and milling machine. He was divorced and practiced martial arts as a hobby, holding a black belt in karate. On the day of the attack on Randy Kane, there was clear video footage of Keel's entire home, including the windows in the home gym. At about 7:15, the video showed Bobby Lee Gerson, dressed in a black sweatshirt, black sweatpants, and white tennis shoes, carrying yard tools including a rake, hoe, and shovel, from the garage to the porch. While they watched, Gerson leaned the tools against the wall where the doorbell camera was located. They watched in bewilderment as he leaned the shovel blade up and handle down, rather than blade down and handle up, as any normal person would have done. The shovel completely covered the chamber. And so it went on for over an hour, until Gerson pulled out his tools and started spreading mulch around the house. "What the hell did I just see?" Man shouted to Gerson. "He blocked the camera," Detective Lucas said worriedly. "I was about to start spreading mulch, so I got the tools out and leaned them against the wall. But then I started feeling a little nauseous, so I went back into the house and sat on the couch and rested for a while. When I felt better, I went back outside and finished mulching." "And I suppose it's just a coincidence that you were wearing a black hoodie and black sweatpants?" Detective Lucas asked mockingly. "They'd have to be very good friends for you to put yourself at risk of aiding and abetting charges," Man said bitterly. "Leland and Betty Lou? Well, Betty Lou is my sister, and I've known Leland and Grant for a long time, so... I'm sorry, what was your question?" As soon as Grant handed her the package, Detective Lucas rummaged through the box to get to Keel's iPhone, then pressed the power button, but did nothing. Dead battery, Lucas thought. "Can I borrow it for a couple days?" she asked. "Take your time," Grant replied. After charging the phone at the station, Lucas and Man huddled around it, waiting for it to boot up. Lucas had an iPhone, and he always eyed Man's Android and the green text bubbles that appeared on it cautiously. Man leaned back in his chair and waited for his partner to do her business. As soon as the phone turned on, it buzzed, downloading messages and missed calls. Lucas opened up iMessage, Apple's native texting platform, and started going through the list. There were the usual number of messages from Kat to her husband, the usual "I love you and miss you," which was ridiculous knowing how blatantly she was cheating on her husband. After Kane's attack, the number of messages from Kat had increased, and she had sent a hell of a lot of them over the past few days, as her situation started to catch up with her. There were a few messages from her brother, but the real surprise was the number of messages from Lynn Dunaway. Detectives knew that Captain Dunaway had worked with Grant in Korea and was now stationed at Fort Cavazos. The messages were friendly, with no hint of romance. They were mostly checking in on each other, he to make sure she was settling into her new duty station, and she to make sure he had come to his senses after learning of his wife's infidelity. They also discussed that Keel found out about his wife's infidelity in the most humiliating way possible, when everyone in the office saw his wife jump into her lover's arms and make out with him in front of the entire school. Oops. They read Danny's message to his dad right after the game and Grant's response. There were a few more "what's up" type messages until they came across a video that Danny had sent to his dad, Uncle Leland, Aunt Betty Lou, and her brother Bobby Lee. In the video, Danny was standing in front of a mirror, and the date and time was stamped a week before the attack. In the video, Danny says, "The banner rally will be next Monday at 9 a.m. I hope you can make it, but I understand if each of you are too busy. We'll talk soon." Poor kid, the detectives thought. He looks so depressed, and his father's family is cutting him out of their lives for keeping his mother's cheating secret. "Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old," Mann said. He hasn't had his phone for over a month, but I see that the whole time he's been answering messages from his child and wife. What's the matter? Assuming he doesn't have another phone, he has either an iPad or a Mac synchronized with his iPhone using an iCloud account. He can reply to messages and the person he's talking to doesn't know they're not coming from his iPhone. The iPhone's location shows Korea, and he's a mile from his brother's house sending them messages. "Damn, right," Detective Mann replied. His family thinks he's in Korea, and he's in town at the same time making moves and finalizing his divorce. "Yeah, but so what? What does that get us?" "Nothing, except that we know he's a conniving bastard." Waking up, Kat Keel found herself in the hospital. For a moment, she couldn't remember what had happened to her, but then everything quickly came to mind. Grant was in town and had been for weeks, but had made no attempt to see her or Danny. The thought, like a physical pain, coursed through her body. "I have to see Grant," she thought. "I have to explain that my affair with Randy meant nothing, that it had no effect on our marriage." Kat began to cry, tears streaming down her face, and she stared at the ceiling. She was still crying when Danny opened the door to her room. Kat stood up and hugged her son. "Mom, are you okay?" "Oh, Danny, your father's in town. The police think he's the one who attacked Randy." "Why do they think it was Dad?" "The police said he's been here for 3 weeks," Kat exclaimed. "That's not good. What are you up to, Mom?" Said, "I just need to talk to your father and explain everything to him. Your father loves us and our life together. He's not going to give it up. Don't worry, baby girl. I'll work it out." Kat and Danny were talking about Grant and reminiscing about fun family holidays when there was a knock on Kat's door and Detectives Mann and Lucas entered the hospital room. "Just checking on you, Mrs. Keel. You look much better than the last time we spoke to you." "I think I'm feeling better after sleeping in a hospital bed for 2 days. Have you seen my husband? Is Grant going to visit me?" Her tone begged for good news they didn't have. We spoke to him this morning. I don't think you should expect him to visit. I have to talk to him. I have to explain to him that it's not as bad as he thinks it is. He needs to realize that what I had with Randy doesn't mean anything." Detective Mann looked seriously pissed off, and Detective Lucas looked at Kat with sympathy. Both detectives' marriages had broken up because of infidelity. In Detective Mann's case, his wife cheated on him with a former high school boyfriend and left the detective a note saying she was fed up with her marriage to a police officer. Detective Lucas's marriage also broke up due to infidelity, but in her case, she cheated on her college professor husband with a fellow police officer. They tried to reconcile, but Detective Lucas was unable to remain faithful and cheated on him again with the same coworker, resulting in her husband filing for divorce. Ironically, she genuinely loved her husband and was devastated when he filed for divorce. She blamed no one but herself and sought therapy to find the cause of her destructive behavior. 3 years later, she was still seeing a therapist every week. She hadn't gone on a date since she was sued. She sympathized with Kat and could only recommend therapy. "Mrs. Keel, do you know how your husband found out about your affair?" "I assume someone told him." "No, ma'am. He said the JAG office was showing the state championship game on the big screen. All of his employees were working that day and watched the game with him. After the game was over, you rushed into Coach Kane's arms, wrapped your legs around him, and started kissing him. His entire office was watching it live." Kat looked at the detective in horror and shook her head. "No, no, that couldn't have happened. I would remember doing something like that. It didn't happen. No, you're lying." "Mom," Danny said, "it really happened. Everyone saw it, and I was standing right there and Dad was watching us, so he knows I knew about your cheating on him." Detective Lucas watched as the realization dawned in Kat's eyes that her marriage was probably over. At that moment, there was a knock on the door and a pot-bellied middle-aged man carrying a large envelope entered Kat's room, who, after saying hello to Danny and the two detectives, asked if she was Catherine Keel. "Excuse me, ma'am," he apologized, holding out the envelope to Kat. "You've been served," the stranger said, and without another word, turned and walked away. Kat handed the envelope to Danny, and with an astonished look asked Danny to open the envelope and tell her what was in it. Danny opened the sealed envelope by running his index finger under the flap and extracted the contents, which he held out to Kat. Divorce statement. Detective Lucas ran out into the hallway in search of a nurse while Danny frantically pressed the nurse call button, and Kat, rocking back and forth in her hospital bed, began breathing loudly and making complaining noises. "Let me show you around," Grant addressed Lynn Dunaway as they walked through the door of the vacant office space. "So you're buying the whole building?" she asked, looking around the interior and peering into each individual office. "I think I'll take it." The space had been the office of an attorney for many years, until he became too old to practice law and put the building up for sale. There was enough room for 3 attorneys, several assistants, a couple of secretaries, and a receptionist. There were large and small conference rooms, men's and women's restrooms, and a kitchenette. Lynn was impressed. "Wait until you see the second floor," Grant said with a smirk. Grant Keel was very happy to see Lynn Dunaway. In the months since he had learned of his wife's infidelity, they had talked on the phone at least 3 times a week, and she had given him invaluable support. During their time together in Korea, Grant had never once seen her as anything other than Captain Dunaway. He knew that blonde-haired and green-eyed Lynn Dunaway was objectively very beautiful, something she didn't notice while she was in uniform, but standing in the empty offices of the building he was about to buy, Grant could see just how gorgeous she was. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, which led them to a small foyer with 2 doors facing each other. Grant unlocked both doors and stood aside so Lynn could enter one of them, and as she stepped into the room, he heard her sigh. The entire second floor of the building was occupied by 2 apartments, a 3,000 square foot apartment and a 1,500 square foot apartment. Both apartments had been completely renovated a few years ago. Modern bathrooms and kitchens, plaster ceilings 15 feet high with intricate moldings. But what made Lynn wince was the view of Lake Ray Ferguson from almost every room in the apartment. Unlike many cities that remodeled their downtown plazas by adding stores and restaurants, Ferguson never needed to do so. The town square was located 1 block from the lake that bears the name of the city's founder. Stores and restaurants had always occupied storefronts in the town square, and when the Army Corps of Engineers built the lake as part of Roosevelt's WPA program downtown, which had always been a thriving and busy area, became even busier because the lake was only a few feet away. The building Grant was about to buy stood on the corner of a street facing the town square, one side facing the avenue leading to the lake and the back facing the lake and the waterfront, where there were even more stores and restaurants. They entered the second, smaller apartment, and Lynn was amazed. It had been renovated at the same time as the larger apartment, and it had the same view of the lake. "Can you afford it?" Lynn asked in a concerned tone. "I have my half of the inheritance left after my parents died a few years ago. That money was invested in my account at Fidelity, and those funds were never commingled with our marital assets. They should be excluded from my divorce agreement. There is more than enough money in that account to pay cash for the building. Are you ready to become a landlord?" Grant shrugged in response to her question. In addition to the law offices and huge apartments that took up the entire second floor of the building, the first floor housed a diner open for breakfast and lunch, a Lilly Pulitzer boutique, and an Irish pub that served great food and featured Irish and Celtic folk bands on Wednesday through Saturday nights. "I'm so jealous of you," Lynn smiled. "It sounds like you found a gold mine at the worst possible time in your life." "In fact, I have an ulterior motive for inviting you here. How would you feel about becoming partners in a new law firm?" Lynn looked at Grant in surprise. "Really? You want me to resign and move to Ferguson? I don't even know what to say about that. Think about this. You'd get a second apartment for free. We'd become Keel and Dunaway, attorneys at law. I don't expect an answer now, but think about it, Lynn." Lynn wandered around the second apartment again, looking around, especially admiring the view of the lake. The apartment was 1,500 square feet, and Grant knew it was the same size as the house she now rented in Killeen, Texas, near Fort Cavazos. As he watched Lynn run her hands over the stone countertop in the kitchen, looking out over the lake, he noticed a thoughtful expression on her face. "Sir, what do you mean their insurance company told you to clean up the sand?" muttered Randy Kane. Muttered Randy Kane. Muttered Randy Kane to his lawyer. He wanted to scream, but it hurt too much. Even to whisper was excruciating. 2 days ago, Randy had most of the wires removed from his jaw, which had been wired shut for almost 8 weeks. There were still a few pins and screws in his jaw, and the clicking sounds coming from the jaw joint were driving him crazy. Any food or liquid that was too hot or too cold caused pain in his head. The casts had been removed from his knees and elbows, but there were still pins and screws in each joint, and they would remain there for the rest of his life. Such was the trauma of the attack. Randy's insurance policy was coming to an end, and he had months, maybe years, to live on his own. Even to go to the bathroom, he needed help, and he would need it for months to come. They deny responsibility. You were attacked on a public street, not on Keel's property. No one has been charged with assault, and the investigation is still ongoing. If any of the family members are found guilty of assaulting you, we may be able to hold them accountable because Keel's homeowner's insurance policy has $1 million deductible, but that's only if someone in their home is convicted. Todd Blair went to high school with Randy Kane, and at the time thought he was a real asshole. Time hasn't changed his opinion of Kane. The realization that he was in this situation because he slept with another man's wife further solidified Todd's low opinion of Kane. What's going on with the police investigation? Every time I call Man or Lucas, they blow me off. Only after that do they bother to call back, Randy muttered bitterly. Todd rubbed his temples, staring at the speakerphone. He had hoped the detectives would talk to Randy, but they seemed to be in no hurry to give him the news. Todd sighed. The investigation is over. I met with Detectives Mann and Lucas yesterday. And? Randy asked impatiently. And you're not going to like it, said Todd. Detectives Mann and Lucas had completed their investigation, and the meeting with the district attorney had not gone smoothly. So, you're telling me you're sure Grant Keel committed the attack? He said. No, Mann replied. We know he did it. But you can't prove it? The district attorney asked. Mann and Lucas looked at each other, unhappy that the conversation had taken such a direction. Sounds like it could be the brother, the district attorney remarked. The detectives reluctantly agreed. Damn, looks like it could be the brother's wife too. The DA checked the name on the file and said, Betty Lou, or even Betty Lou's brother, Bobby Lee Gearson. Both detectives nodded glumly. You both know that the purpose of a criminal investigation is to narrow down the list of suspects, not to continually add to it. Do another investigation and you'll put half of Ferguson on the suspect list. The detectives looked sullenly at each other and then at the district attorney, who shook his head. Sorry, detectives, if that's the best you've got, it's a no. There's no way I'm charging or going to court with this dog case. A first-year law student can get the charges dropped. Come back when you have something. Mann and Dunn returned to the Ferguson police station and dejectedly reported to the assistant chief of police the results of their meeting with the district attorney. The DA assigned them a new case, placing the assault on Randy Kane in the open and unsolved section. Kat didn't fight the divorce. Her attorney advised her that it would be a waste of time. Her affair was so public and disrespectful to her husband that no judge would insist on counseling. Her best option was to agree to the divorce and, in time, work on repairing her relationship with her husband and repairing the damage she had done to her son by forcing him to hide his infidelity from his father. Grant was fair in the divorce. Kat got the house and Grant finished paying the mortgage. In addition, Kat would be entitled to a portion of his military pension. The calculation formula was based on the fact that they had been married 20 of the 25 years of Grant's military career, so she would receive less than half. Grant wanted to take a few pieces of furniture from the house, but little else but tools and his clothes. Finally, it was time to talk. Grant didn't feel like it, but he knew Kat needed it and was ready to make one last gesture. They met in a conference room at his attorney's office. Grant, I know what you think of me, and as cruel as those feelings are and as disgusted as I am with you, Please know that I am more disgusted and horrified by my behavior than you will ever be able to imagine. I have no excuses, and there is nothing I can say to mitigate my actions. I hope one day you can forgive me and be in the same room with me. Grant looked at his now ex-wife. Kat, I loved you. Heck, I still love you despite everything you've done. But every day I'm learning to love you a little less. I hear what you say about how you feel, but as far as I'm concerned, it's just word salad. I don't wish you harm, but I don't wish you well either. I want you out of my life as much as possible. I know we'll have to communicate because we share a son and there will be events we'll both be involved in, but if I had a choice, I'd rather never see or speak to you again for the rest of my life. Kat cried at these words from Grant. She understood his anger and hurt, but she had one last request for her soon-to-be ex-husband. Grant, please do one last thing for me now that our marriage is over. Please see Danny. He misses his father. It kills me that you haven't seen him since you got back. Please see your son and talk to him. Grant nodded his head, turned, and left the room to talk to his lawyer. There has to be something I can do. Randy whined pitifully. I can't coach and I can't teach. I can barely wipe my ass. I'm almost broke and my insurance is running out. What am I supposed to do? Oh, Jay Simpson, Todd said. What the hell are you talking about? Randy said. Remember when the jury acquitted OJ of destroying his wife and that Goldman guy? Yeah, so? Goldman's family sued OJ seeking damages. Civil suits don't have the same burden of proof as criminal suits, and the family won millions. OJ didn't have any money, but they took what he had, and in the court of public opinion, everyone now knows OJ is guilty. Are you saying I should sue Grant Keel? I don't know. I guess that's an option for you. It's up to you. Will you take the case? Todd Blair quickly shook his head. No. He wanted nothing more to do with this asshole. I'm all booked up, but I can refer you to someone. It might be more in line with his qualifications. At Grant's apartment after the divorce, everyone came together. His brother Leland, Leland's wife Betty Lou, Betty Lou's brother Bobby Lee Gerson, Lynn Dunaway, and Grant were chatting in the living room of Grant's apartment above his law office when the doorbell on the lower level rang. Grant opened the camera app, noted the visitor's identity, unlocked the door, and walked to his apartment door to wait for the guest, who knocked a minute later. Seeing his son standing in the entryway, Grant hugged him and then pulled him back at arm's length, taking him by the shoulders. You look good, son, Grant said. You too, Dad, Danny replied. Danny followed his father into the living room and greeted his aunt, uncle, and uncle by marriage with a smile. He wasn't familiar with Lynn, but he knew who she was. They all looked at Danny in silence. A baseball bat? Didn't I think we were planning on muting it a little? Betty Lou said. Danny looked at Lynn, who replied, I knew all about it back in Korea. As soon as you texted your father about the affair, I found out about it 10 minutes later. As soon as he found out that his mother was cheating on his father, Danny texted his father. He kept his father in the loop the whole time. They deleted their messages to hide the fact that they were cheating, while at the same time hoping that they would never need that fact. The plan was to just get off active duty and divorce Kat, but things changed. Kane began pressuring Danny not to enroll at West Point, and the level of disrespect Kane showed the Grant family increased dramatically. After Kane appeared naked in front of Danny in his own home, emerging from Kat's bed, and then attacked Danny in his own home, Danny wanted revenge. Some people quote the ancient proverb that if you start down the path of revenge, dig 2 graves first. Grant thought that was absolute nonsense. He rather liked Francis Bacon's statement that revenge is a species of savage justice, although he knew that Bacon was not advocating revenge, but rather the opposite. Nevertheless, Grant felt that there was a certain cathartic healing power in showing cruelty to those who had wronged you greatly. He didn't want to deny his son wild justice. So Grant went along with Danny's plan to end his mother's affair without destroying his relationship with her. It had long ago been decided that Danny would stay away from his father and his family until the divorce was finalized and the police investigation was over. Danny shrugged apologetically. Everything just came pouring out. Every comment about him being my stepfather. It was all I could do not to lash out at him. I knew I couldn't handle him one-on-one. That leg kick he threw showed me how fast and strong he was. I couldn't overpower him that way, but Danny stuttered at the thought of bringing the bat down on Coach Kane's back. He hated being attacked from behind, but otherwise the much larger man would have destroyed him. When I was packing my bike, you were calm as a cucumber. When I read about how you knocked that piece of shit out, I thought, oh yeah, he's definitely Keel. Acts just like his father and uncle. Betty Lou looked at Lynn, who was sipping a glass of wine and listening to the conversation with interest. Are you sure you want to do business with this family? Lynn smiled and took a sip of wine. Later, when the guests had left, Grant sat down on the couch next to Lynn, their shoulders and thighs touching. Well, partner, she began, I'm glad it's over. Now we can focus on growing our practice and other things. She smiled at Grant, who smiled back. While Grant had been married, he had refused to show his feelings for Lynn. Now that the divorce was final, he could step out of the uncertainty and let his feelings for the person who had supported him for so long come out. The next morning, Grant was sitting in his office reviewing a will that one of his clients had instructed him to draft when there was the sound of the door opening, signifying that someone had entered the law office of Keel and Dunaway. Lynn came out of her office and joined Grant in the reception area. They didn't have a receptionist yet. How can we help you? Lynn asked a burly, middle-aged man. I'm looking for Grant Keel, the man replied. That's me, Grant said and held out his hand for a handshake. Instead, the man handed Grant an envelope. You've been served. The man shrugged apologetically, then turned and walked out of the office. Roland Cruz stared at the wreckage of the man sitting across from him. He was well aware of the attack on the former head coach of the Ferguson Wildcats. After the attack, Kane was fired from the Ferguson School District because of his outspoken affair with a married teacher who was also stripped of her job. And Cruz knew he had a reputation for not knowing how to work the bottom. When Raleigh walked into a courtroom with a client, most judges automatically ascribed some degree of guilt to his client before the trial even began. So you're having fun with this guy's wife and her son knows about it and doesn't mind? Really? Randy nodded his head. I know it sounds crazy, but Danny Keel and I had a very good relationship. You say had like it's in the past. And now you don't have a good relationship? He hasn't called or visited me since I was attacked, Randy said bitterly. Not even once. And I've been like a father to him. Raleigh Cruz shook his head, imagining the idiocy of the pile of dog shit Randy Kane had brought him a few weeks ago. It had been almost 6 months since the attack. Randy was desperate for money, and a lawsuit against Grant Keel was his only option. The police investigation had gotten him nowhere. They were sure it was Grant Keel who had attacked Randy Kane, but they couldn't prove it, and Keel's family had muddled the case so badly that no jury could convict him. There wasn't even circumstantial evidence linking Grant Keel to the attack, let alone hard evidence. The bat that had been used had never been found, and all the hassle of the Black Hood family that day proved nothing but that they were sneaky assholes. So all Raleigh had to do was try to figure out what the hell was going on. He had requested and received copies of all the evidence the police had and was now studying it, trying to figure out what the hell had happened. By all accounts, Catherine Cat Keel had been a faithful, loving wife for 20 years. Her family had been deployed to various military installations throughout the United States and Europe, and in all that time there had never been the slightest hint of an affair or inappropriate behavior. When her husband was sent to Korea, something changed. Since Korea was considered a heavy tour, his family could only accompany him if he signed a 2-year contract. Otherwise, the tour lasted 12 months. This meant that Danny would not be able to play football his senior year. After much discussion, it was decided that the Keels would buy a house in Grant's hometown of Ferguson, and Danny would attend Ferguson High School, while Kat tried to find a job teaching science, a job she had held in various capacities during her marriage. Shortly after her husband left for Korea, Kat fell in love with a handsome man, twice divorced and 10 years younger than her football coach. She had been having an affair with Kane for several months, and her son was aware of the affair. What's more, the entire school suspected something was going on. Grant Keel found out about the affair and moved to Ferguson after he was discharged from the army. He did not tell his wife or son about his move and settled in with his brother. Grant Keel, his brother and sister-in-law avoided Kat Keel and their son all this time. As Raleigh studied all the evidence and looked at all the records, an idea began to form in his mind. Leland, Betty Lou, Bobby Lee, Lynn, and Grant got together again. this time joined by Danny. All but Lynn were served with a notice that they were being sued as participants in a conspiracy to assault Randall Kane Jr. The assault had left him incapacitated and destitute. The plaintiff sought $1,000,000 in actual and punitive damages. How bad is that? Bobby Lee Gearson asked. To that question, Grant shrugged his shoulders. A jury in a civil trial doesn't need the same burden of proof as a jury in a criminal trial. In a criminal trial, the prosecutor must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil trial, the plaintiff has to prove that it could have happened. Look, I'm not going to subpoena you. This is my problem, mine and Danny's. I'll meet with Kane and his lawyer and agree to a settlement if the suit against the three of you is dropped. Bullshit, Betty Lou snapped back. We're a family. We stick together. Lynn will protect us and kick our ass. Agreed? Leland and Bobby Lee immediately agreed. Bobby Lee wasn't a blood relative, but he had known Grant and Leland since elementary school. When his best friend Leland married his sister Betty Lou, it was one of the happiest days of his life. So it's settled then? Leland asked. Are we going to tell this Roland Cruz guy to go to hell? Everyone agreed. During Raleigh Cruz's opening statement, he explained his strategy to the jury. He was going to prove to them that there was a conspiracy between Grant Keel's friends and family to attack Randy Kane and then cover up that attack. He further explained that although the police could not prove with certainty which of the conspirators attacked Randy, they all participated in the conspiracy and should be prosecuted. Lynn's contention was simple. The police didn't have enough evidence to charge anyone, and Randy Kane's lawsuit was a desperate attempt to break up the family of a man he had brutally wronged by having an affair with his wife. Cruz's first witnesses were predictable. He called emergency room doctors and various medical professionals who had treated Kane to testify, to detail the extent of Kane's injuries from the attack. There was very little room for cross-examination because Kane's injuries were what they were. They were not self-inflicted, although that option was discussed, but it was ultimately decided that convincing the jury that Kane had hit himself several times in the face and testicles with a baseball bat would be difficult, but were inflicted by someone who had a personal grudge against Kane. Cruz then called law enforcement, who responded to Kat's 911 call. They confirmed that the crime scene was as Cruz had presented it in his opening statement. Cruz then called Catherine Keel to testify. Kat confirmed that she had been having an affair with Randy Kane and that the affair had lasted several months. She stated that Kane told her that he was in love with her and wanted her to divorce her husband to be with him. She denied that she was in love with Kane, although she admitted that she liked him a lot. She knew that Kane had made some inappropriate remarks to Danny, but she realized from Randy's words that they had been locker room talk, and that Danny hadn't been bothered by the remarks. Finally, she admitted that she knew that Randy had gotten into a bit of a fight with her son, and Randy had had to use force on Danny to calm him down. She also admitted that she was under the impression that her husband had been in Korea at the time of the attack on Randy and didn't know about her infidelity. When she was informed that Grant had been in Ferguson for weeks and knew of her infidelity, she had a mental crisis that required hospitalization. Lynn's cross-examination of her destroyed Kat. Mrs. Keel, why did you decide to commit adultery with the plaintiff, Randy Kane? Adultery, Cruz shouted. The term adultery is prejudicial to my client, Your Honor. That may be true, Mr. Cruz, but it's a factual term and I'll allow its use, said the judge. Mrs. Keel, please answer the question, Lynn said. I didn't have a good reason. My husband is a great guy. He's smart, handsome, athletic, and he loved me very much. But I was weak, vain, and insecure. At the time, I was approaching my 42nd birthday. My son was soon to leave home and go to college. My husband was serving thousands of miles away, and I was lonely. Coach Kane is a likable, pleasant conversationalist. All the female students and teachers had a crush on him, and I was flattered that this guy 10 years younger started hitting on me. He knew just what to say to get through my defenses. I fell for his bait. Kat paused to gather her thoughts. Lynn brought her a box of tissues from the defendant's desk and waited for Kat to nod her head that she was ready. I've learned a lot in the last few months. I now know how to defend myself against predators like Randy Kane, Kat stated. Protect, Cruz shouted, jumping to his feet. Mr. Kane is not on trial today. and the witness's characterization of him as a predator is false and inflammatory. I ask that it be stricken from the record and the witness be admonished not to make any more such statements. The judge looked at Kane for a moment before responding to Cruz's objection. Whether that term is false is a question for another day. However, I will agree that the term is inflammatory. But, counselor, it's ridiculous for me to even point this out, but Mrs. Keel is your witness. You called her, not the defendant's. Objection sustained. Blushing with embarrassment, Cruz angrily sat down in his seat next to Kane. Mrs. Keel, Lynn began, do you think it's possible that any of the defendants assaulted Coach Randy Kane? Kat looked at the table where her husband, son, and the other 3 defendants sat. She shook her head resolutely. No, I refuse to admit that they were so enraged that they acted at all differently from what I know. Tears streamed down Kat's face. If they were so enraged that they attacked Randy, then I know they are lost to me forever. Kat brought her hands up to her face, sobbing pitifully at the trial. The next witness was the lead detective investigating the attack on Randy Kane. Will you please tell the jury your name, employer, and position? Roland Cruz addressed the man after he was sworn in. My name is Kenneth Mann. I am a detective with the Ferguson Township Police Department. Thank you, detective. How long have you been with the Ferguson Township Police Department? 22 years, 15 as a patrolman and the last 7 as a detective. Detective, can you tell the jury the events of that morning? My partner, Detective Brenda Lucas, and I were investigating a report of a stolen vehicle when dispatch directed us to the address where the alleged assault occurred. We arrived at 1212 Conway Lane and found a male who looked very unwell. He was being assisted by the homeowner, Catherine Keel. Medics have not yet arrived on the scene, but we have been informed that they are on their way. Detective Mann, in your professional opinion, what could have caused the kind of injuries you saw on Mr. Kane? A baton. Something like a baseball bat. Roland next asked Mann to give the jury an update on the investigation, beginning with his conversation with Kat Keel. So Mrs. Keel didn't know her husband was in Ferguson? No, she didn't. She thought her husband was still in Korea. It wasn't until a few days later when I tried to contact him in Korea that I learned he had returned home to Ferguson. You didn't find it unusual that he was in Ferguson but couldn't contact his wife and son? You could say that, Detective Mann replied dryly. It was cause for alarm. You questioned Mr. Keel at his brother's house, did you not? Yes. Did Mr. Keel know of his wife's affair? He stated that he was aware of it. How did Mr. Keel know about his wife's affair? Cruz asked. He stated that while watching the school's championship game, he witnessed his wife kissing Coach Kane. From the video he watched, he realized that his son knew about his wife's affair. Detective Mann, did Mr. Keel state that that was when he learned of his wife's infidelity? Mann thought for a moment before answering. No, he didn't, now that you mention it. He avoided lying by evading the question, and I didn't catch him at it. Mann looked embarrassed at this admission. Raleigh then admitted the tapes from Leland and Betty Lou Keel's home security system, then walked the jury through the recordings. Detective Mann, as a police professional, what do you think of these recordings? At first glance, they look pretty normal. On the one hand, they are normal everyday activities repeated every day with slight variations. On the other hand, the Keeleys are very clever. They try to sow doubt and confuse any investigation that might check their activities. Have you asked them about this? Cruz asked. Asked them. Several times. And each time they said the same thing. The video speaks for itself. Next, Roland introduced the footage captured by Bobby Lee Gerson's doorbell camera. In your professional opinion, what is the significance of this video? Cruz asked. The same as with Keel's video. It looks honest at first glance, but it actually has a lot of innuendo in it that ends with Mr. Gerson turning off the only camera overlooking Keel's house. Did that strike you as suspicious? Mann grinned sardonically. It seems suspicious to me everything those 4 men were doing, and now there are 5 of them, and a son as well. And when you asked Mr. Gerson about it, what did he say? I asked him. He acted on Keel's textbook. He said, the video speaks for itself. The last video presented was a recording Danny sent to his relatives, letting them know when the support rally would be held. What's your opinion of this video, detective? I felt sorry for the guy. He reaches out to his relatives and they all cut him off because he knew about his mother's affair with the coach and didn't tell anyone about it. When did Danny Keel send the video to his family? Cruz asked. A week before the attack on Coach Kane. Did you notice what Danny Keel was wearing in the video? Black hooded sweatshirt and dark jeans. Everyone in his family seems to have black hoodies, Mann remarked dryly as the jury chuckled at the witness's statement. As part of your investigation, did you check to see if Danny Keel was present at the rally the day Coach Kane was attacked? I have verified that fact. How did you verify that? Cruz asked. I asked the principal of the school. He confirmed that Danny was there the entire time and assisted him because he, the principal, had to take over Coach Kane's role in his absence. You can also verify that Danny was there by going to the Ferguson newspaper's website, Rowland said, holding out a copy of the paper to Mann. On the front page was a large picture of the football team at a rally. Danny was standing next to the school principal. Detective Mann, could you describe what Danny Keel is wearing in this picture? The jury could see Mann's eyes bulge and his mouth open as he sat stunned, staring at the newspaper. He's wearing a black hooded sweatshirt and dark jeans, just like the rest of his family that day. Did you check into Danny Keel's activities in the period leading up to the action? Detective Mann shook his head. No, we knew he was at school, and we had no reason to think he might have left campus. The detective paused and glanced at the defendant's desk. That's on my conscience. I knew his father was conniving, and I should have realized that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Lynn objected, and the judge ruled to strike Mann's statement from the record, but it was a wake-up call. Detective Mann, going back to the video that Danny sent to his relatives, could this be confirmation of a previously agreed-upon plan? A plan where Danny was telling his relatives what to wear on that particular day and for them to have an alibi. Could it be that you've been looking for the wrong person all along? Protest, Lynn bellowed, but it was too late. The jury turned their collective eyes on Danny. How did he guess? Danny asked. That evening, the group gathered at the law firm of Keel and Dunaway. The remains of several pizzas were cooling as they discussed the day's testimony. Looks like Roland Cruz, Esquire, is a lot sharper than people give him credit for, Lynn replied. He guessed that all the actions of your father, your uncle, Betty Lou, and Bobby Lee were a smokescreen to give you a chance to get off on Kane. Maybe you were too smart for your own good. He either didn't know Betty Lou dumped her bike a block away from the school or can't prove it, so he's not touching the case. What do we do next? Betty Lou asked. I'll make a deal with Kane, said Grant. No, everyone said in unison. We're in this together, said Betty Lou, and Danny, Leland, and Bobby Lee nodded in agreement. How badly did we get hurt today? Danny asked Lynn. No doubt it left a mark, but Kat helped us more than Kane did. The remark about the predator was golden. Lynn looked at Grant a little surprised. What did you think of her statement? Grant shrugged. I'm glad she was able to insert the comment about the predator, but how did her statement affect me in general? It hasn't. She'll always be in my life as Danny's mother, but nothing more. He took Lynn's left hand and brought it to his lips, smiling at his partner. Kane will testify tomorrow, and I'm sure Cruz will dismiss the plaintiff's claims. We'll quickly compile a witness list so the trial will likely conclude tomorrow afternoon. For better or worse, we should have a verdict the day after tomorrow. The group sat in muffled silence, pondering the end of the trial and the possible verdict. As expected, the first witness called the next morning was Randy Kane, former head coach of the Ferguson Wildcats football team. After he was sworn in, Raleigh Cruz began his questioning. Coach Kane, he began, which elicited an immediate reaction from behind the defendant's desk. Protest, Lynn stated. Mr. Kane is not currently employed as a coach. I would like to remind Mr. Cruz that Mr. Kane's employment was terminated because of his affair with a married teacher. The judge thought for a moment before shaking his head. Counselor, I overrule your objection. Mr. Kane has been a coach in the past. Years ago, I coached my son's little league team. When I meet any of his teammates, they still refer to me as Coach Bowman. At this point, I will allow the plaintiff to use the honorific address Coach. As Cruz was about to gloat over the attorney, he was momentarily distracted by the amused look on Lynn Dunaway's face. Moving on, Coach Kane, would you please describe to the court your relationship with Catherine Keel? Kane managed to make a sad expression on his face. I was in love with her. I didn't want to fall in love with a married woman, but sometimes your heart leads you where you shouldn't go. I know it was wrong, and I deeply regret to her husband my part in the affair. Randy paused and looked at Grant with what he thought was a genuinely apologetic look. I was wrong, but that doesn't excuse what they did to me. Kane angrily pointed to the defense table. Cruz clapped both hands in the air to calm Kane down. Did Mrs. Keel reciprocate your feelings? Yes, or at least I thought so. She told me she loved me, but as soon as I suggested she divorce her husband and marry me, she blew me off. We talked about her husband, but if she thought I was belittling him or anything else, she got mad at me. She wouldn't let me say anything bad about him that I thought was funny. Kane shook his head and looked sadly at Kat, who was sitting in the back of the courtroom. The only thing I did wrong was fall in love with the wrong person and then try to do the right thing. Turning to the jury, Kane portrayed a sad and wistful expression on his face. Cruz looked at the jury and wasn't sure if they sympathized with his client, but he knew from experience that juries were notoriously difficult to judge. How was your relationship with her son, Danny? Cruz asked. Fine, Kane replied. It was his first year at Ferguson High School, and it was my first year as head coach. Danny came in with a tremendous amount of talent, and I think I was able to capitalize on that potential and turn him into one of the best quarterbacks in the state, and maybe in the whole country. We had a very close player-coach relationship, and I thought he considered me almost a stepfather. Now I realize I was wrong. If it was Danny who attacked me, then I never really knew him. At this, Cruz fell silent, and Lynn Dunaway began her interrogation. Mr. Kane, what is your definition of a man? Cruz immediately objected, asking if the question was appropriate. At the judge's question, Lynn explained that it would soon become clear. The judge allowed the question but told Lynn that she was on a short leash. I believe a man is someone his teammates can always count on, someone who has their back and will be there for them, someone who always gives 110%, someone who lives his life in a way that you can hold your head up and be proud that he did his best for himself and his team. Mr. Kane, it's so important to you that you even hung that plaque over the locker room exit, right? Lynn held out a picture to Kane with the caption, "Play like a man today." Yeah, Kane said, feeling himself getting uncomfortable with where this question was going. When the players leave the locker room, they touch the sign on the way out, don't they? Yes. Mr. Kane, would you say that all those eloquent descriptions of what it means to be a man had any effect on your relationship with Danny Keel? Kane looked intently at Lynn, who sat silent after asking her question. Judge, would you please ask the witness to answer my question? Before the judge could speak, Randy barked out, No. Is that what you wanted to hear? No, my actions were not in accordance with the way a man should act, but I made the mistake of falling in love with a woman who I thought loved me back. A married woman, Lynn emphasized. Yes, a married woman, Kane said, his bitterness evident. Mr. Kane, tell us about how you attacked Danny Keel. The change of direction confused Kane for a moment. What? I never attacked Danny. You mean the one time I thought he got mad and was going to attack me? That was just a little spat. There was no attack. Thank you for putting that on the record, Mr. Kane. You've talked a lot about your mentoring of Danny and how he became the quarterback he is now. Did you receive coaching offers from colleges and universities after Ferguson won the state title? Yes, I received several offers, Kane replied. Because of the attack, they were all canceled. Really, Mr. Kane? Because of the attack? Lynn walked over to the defendant's desk and picked up some papers, bringing them to the witness stand and handing them to Kane. Are these copies of your offer letters? She asked. After examining the letters for a minute, Kane agreed that they were his offer letters from several colleges. Mr. Kane, each of these offer letters seems to be contingent on you being able to recruit Danny Keel. Is that correct? Kane's face blazed with embarrassment. How did that bitch manage to get copies of the letters? He puzzled. Yeah, right, he snapped back. Danny, like his father, was going to enroll at West Point. The congressman recommended him, and he was approved. You insisted that Kat Keel try to talk him out of enrolling there and instead go with you to the college where you'd be hired. Isn't that right? Yes, but I knew it was best for him too. If he played at a D1 school, it would get him into the NFL and make millions. He'd be set for life. And if you had followed him to the NFL as a coach, you'd be alive too, wouldn't you? Seems like your reputation as a coach was as solid as your relationship with Danny Keel, doesn't it? Nah, Kane looked at Lynn again as she turned to the ref and said, I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor. Upon returning from lunch, it was time for Lynn to call her first witness, Danny Keel. After taking the oath of office, Danny took his seat on the witness stand. Danny, when did you first learn of your mother's affair with Randy Kane? I don't remember the exact date, but it was pretty soon after it started. About a day or two later. And what did you do after you found out about it? I texted my dad on FaceTime to let him know what was going on. The audience gasped loudly as Kat realized that her son's devotion to his father outweighed his devotion to his cheating mother. What was your father's reaction? At first, he didn't believe me. Then he was shocked for a while. Then he cooled down and said he'd contact me when he thought it over. We talked a few days later and he told me to follow Mr. Kane and Mom's lead for a while. I did just that. When Mom realized I knew, she told me to keep quiet about it and it would go away after a while. But if I told Dad, he would divorce her and ruin our family. As she asked questions, Lynn stepped aside to be near the jury and saw that they were sympathetic to Danny. Danny, your mother mentioned a minor altercation that Mr. Kane referred to in his testimony as an altercation. Can you describe that incident for the jury? I was sitting at breakfast in the kitchen. My mother and Mr. Kane either didn't know or didn't care that I was home. It was clear what they were doing there. I stood up and took a step toward him and he did a backflip, knocking my legs out from under me. I hit the kitchen floor with such force it took my breath away. The audience gasped and sobbed again as Kat realized her complicity in the appalling disrespect Randy Kane had shown her family. Raleigh Cruz could only watch in horror as the jury members had long since stopped sympathizing with Randy Kane. Danny, there is a lot of talk about the video of you asking your family members to come to your rally. The plaintiffs allege that you, a high school student, were the ringleader of some grand conspiracy to attack Mr. Kane and then cover it up. I suppose they believe you came up with this plan in class or maybe in the school cafeteria. Lynn waited for the laughter to subside and noticed again that several members of the jury were looking fondly at Danny. Can you tell us about this video? Lynn asked as the video played on the courtroom monitor. Danny looked seriously at the jury. I know you've heard about it many times during the trial, but the video really speaks for itself. After that, Lynn had no more questions for Danny and turned the questioning over to Raleigh Cruz, who had only one question for Danny. Danny, do you know who finished off Randy Kane on the street outside your house? Danny looked at his father, then at Raleigh Cruz and replied, Yes, I do. Raleigh was speechless for a moment at that admission, but then gathered his wits and asked, Who attacked Randy Kane? I beat the crap out of him for attacking me earlier and for having an affair with my mother. The audience sighed again and Kat shouted, No, Danny. The judge banged his gavel to warn and calm the crowd in the courtroom. Cruz smiled triumphantly and bowed his head mockingly to Lynn. No further questions for this witness. As Danny left the witness box, Lynn called the next witness, Grant Keel. After familiarizing Grant with his previous testimony, Lynn asked him for his thoughts on the videotape of the attack on Kane taken by Keel's doorbell camera. The videotape speaks for itself, Grant replied to chuckles from the jury. Sir, do you know who attacked Randy Kane outside your house? Lynn asked. Yes, I do. It was me, Grant said. I beat the crap out of him for attacking Danny and having an affair with my wife. Protest, shouted Raleigh Cruz from the plaintiff's table. Your Honor, Danny Keel has already admitted to the assault. The defendants are just trying to confuse the jury. Mr. Cruz, you're the one who set the precedent for asking that question of the witnesses. Your objection is overruled. Cruz had only one question for Grant. Who's lying, you or your son? Grant shrugged. To say that neither of us is lying is tantamount to saying we're both lying, isn't it, counselor? Cruz blinked slowly in confusion at the answer. As he tried to untangle the knot Grant Keel had tied him in, several members of the jury chuckled. Lynn removed Grant from the witness stand and called the next witness, Leland Keel. Keel's questioning followed the same pattern as Grant's. After ascertaining the accuracy of the tape and stating, "The tape speaks for itself," Lynn asked Leland the main question. Do you know who attacked Randy Kane outside your brother's house? Raleigh Cruz shook his head in barely concealed anger. He already knew the answer to Lynn Dunaway's question. Yes, I know. It was me, Leland said. I beat the hell out of him for attacking Danny and having an affair with my brother's wife. Raleigh looked at the jury, most of whom were trying to hide smiles and laughter. He looked at his client and shook his head. After dismissing Leland, Lynn called Betty Lou Keel to the stand to testify. Bobby Lou's testimony ended with, Yes, I know. It was me. I beat the crap out of him for assaulting Danny and having an affair with my brother-in-law's wife. Bobby Lee Gearson's testimony ended in much the same way. Yes, I know. It was me. I attacked him for attacking Danny and having an affair with my sister's brother-in-law's wife. Roland Cruz's helpless rage was evident in his closing statement to the jury as he pointed to the defendants. I don't need to prove my case. They've already proven it for me. One or more of the defendants brutally assaulted Randy Kane. After the attack, one or more of the defendants, acting in concert, conspired to cover up the crime and entered into a criminal conspiracy for that purpose. You, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, know what the truth is. Please do your duty and convict Randy Kane. Lynn's closing statement was equally brief. The only thing the plaintiffs have proven is that Randy Kane is a disgusting man who has affairs with married women and then abuses their families. If there was evidence of guilt, they would have been arrested. I ask that judgment be entered in favor of the defendants. I thank you. With these words, Judge Bowman banged his gavel, removing the jury to deliberate. While the jury deliberated, the Ferguson Five, as they had dubbed themselves after Randy Kane's lawsuit, ate pizza in Grant's apartment. They believed they had done the best they could under the circumstances. No one had lied under oath or to the police, although they admitted they had been less than forthright in stating the facts. Even the fact that they had admitted to attacking Kane themselves was true to some extent. They were indeed guilty, albeit retrospectively. How long do you think it will take the jury? Bobby Lee Gearson asked. 7 minutes. I don't think it will take them long to decide whether they are guilty or innocent. We've pleaded guilty. Deciding how much to award that asshole will take most of the jury's time. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Grant took a bite of his pizza and stared sullenly at the floor. He regretted letting the others talk him out of his offer to settle with Kane. If he'd done that, it would have been over by now. How's your mom doing? Betty Lou asked Danny. Danny shrugged and leaned his elbows on his knees. She's not doing well at all. She comes home from school, goes straight to her bedroom and cries all night. We've talked about her affair and divorce several times now, and she's still having a hard time coming to terms with the divorce. When I asked her how she thought it would end when Daddy found out, she started crying so hard that I had to leave her in her room until she calmed down. She said she expected Daddy to be angry with her, but that he would figure it out and fix it because that's what he always did. When something went wrong, Daddy fixed it. It was only now starting to dawn on her that nothing could be fixed and that she was responsible for her own situation. She was having fun and found out about it, Leland said firmly in response to Betty Lou's reproachful look. Thank you, Mr. Reddit, Betty Lou snorted. I almost feel sorry for her. I've been her friend since you two started dating. If she had feelings for another man, she could have contacted me and I would have dropped everything to be with her. Any one of us could have done that. Instead, she isolated herself from those who cared about her the most in order to pursue a relationship with that useless jerk. As they nodded their heads, pondering the stupidity of people in general and cheaters in particular, Lynn's cell phone rang. Judge Bowman's clerk, she said. The verdict is in. The five Fergusons and their attorney stood up as Judge Bowman entered the courtroom. As they took their seats, the judge clarified with the jury foreman that they had reached a verdict and that it was unanimous. The foreman relayed the jury's findings to the bailiff, who relayed them to Judge Bowman. As all five of them, plus Lynn, stood before the verdict was announced, Grant closed his eyes, once again regretting not making Randy Kane a settlement offer. In Randy Kane v. Grant Keel, Daniel Keel, Leland Keel, Betty Lou Keel, and Bobby Lee Gerson, we conclude that there was a conspiracy to attack Randy Kane for having an extramarital affair with Catherine Keel and for Randy Kane abusing Daniel Keel. When Judge Bowman paused, Grant was somewhat dejected. The verdict was expected, but hearing it in court was humbling. We also find that plaintiff Randy Kane should receive from defendants Grant Keel, Daniel Keel, Leland Keel, Betty Lou Keel, and Bobby Lee Gerson a total of $1,000 for actual and compensatory damages, and $100 for punitive damages. Judge Bowman glanced over his glasses at the jurors, who were looking at him with smug smirks. Then he turned to the plaintiff's table and looked at Randy Kane. Kane's face was crimson with rage as he stood at the table and began hurling insults at the jury and the judge. "You let them get away with it? You stupid bastards! Is this what you call justice?" yelled Kane as Raleigh Cruz tried in vain to calm him down and get him back in his seat. "Do I have any reason to assemble a jury?" Bowman asked. The jury foreman smirked at the judge and shook his head. Bowman sighed and turned to the defendants. "You have 90 days to appeal the verdict. However, something tells me you will accept this verdict and walk away with it." The 6 people gathered around the defendant's table laughed, smiled, and hugged each other as Judge Bowman dismissed the jury and banged his gavel, ending the trial. Kat stood up, looked proudly at her former family, and walked out of the courtroom alone, tears streaming down her cheeks. Of course, the verdict was not appealed. The group took it as a victory, and Grant happily wrote a check for $1,010. The check was made payable to the court, which was to forward the money to Raleigh Cruz so that there would be no need for further communication with the former coach, who promptly left the area after Cruz wrote him a check for $707, the amount of the jury verdict minus Raleigh's 30% interest. Cruz was disappointed, but resigned himself to the fact that he'd gotten a shitty hand. Such is the nature of contingent cases. Soon, Grant and Lynn were back to their normal legal practice. As their relationship deepened, they discussed what to do with Lynn's apartment. The issue of children also came up. Lynn wanted at least 1 and preferably 2, while Grant wanted none. At 46, he considered himself too old to be a father. Lynn explained to Grant that he was an idiot. So at the age of 47, Grant Keel became a father again. And Grant and Lynn were not the only new parents in the Keel family. Leland and Betty Lou decided to adopt a child. Betty Lou knew all her life that she couldn't have a child, but always questioned whether to adopt. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.